What's up, Heavy Jabs Nation? Welcome back to the channel where we break down the sweet science with the kind of brutal honesty that makes promoters nervous and trainers sweat. Before we dive into today's absolute war of a matchup, make sure you smash that like button harder than Wardley smashed Fraser Clarke's face, and subscribe for more no-nonsense boxing analysis that cuts through the promotional hype like a crisp left hook. Trust me, you're going to want to stick around for this one, because what I'm about to reveal about Fabio Wardley's technical abilities might just blow your mind, or at least make you reconsider that mortgage payment you were about to put on Joseph Parker. So here we are, October 25, the O2 Arena in London, and we've got ourselves a classic boxer versus puncher narrative that's older than Floyd Mayweather's retirement announcements. Joseph Parker, the crafty New Zealand technician with more comebacks than a 90s boy band, squaring off against Fabio Wardley, the British knockout artist who's been demolishing heavyweights faster than most people demolish a pizza on fight night. But here's the million-dollar question that everyone's dancing around like it's a cobra in a phone booth. Can Fabio Wardley, the man with fists that hit like runaway freight trains, actually outbox Joseph Parker in a pure technical exchange? Spoiler alert, the answer is way more complicated than your drunk uncle's theories about who really won Fury versus Wilder 1. Let's start with Joseph Parker, because if you're going to understand why this fight is way more interesting than the mainstream media is giving it credit for, you need to understand what kind of fighter Parker actually is in 2025. This isn't the cautious, tentative Parker who got outworked by Anthony Joshua in 2018. That fight where the referee seemingly had a personal vendetta against inside fighting and broke them up more times than a high school principal at prom. No, this is a completely revitalized Parker who's been on an absolute tear through the heavyweight division like a man possessed. 6 straight wins, including victories over Deontay Wilder, a legitimate former world champion who can still separate your consciousness from your body with one right hand, Zhilei Zhang. But what makes Parker so technically sound? Well, let me paint you a picture that the casual fan isn't seeing when they watch highlight reels on Instagram. Parker's jab isn't just some lazy rangefinder that heavyweights throw to check distance. It's an actual weapon, a fast, snapping punch that he uses to control range, disrupt rhythm, and set up combinations. When he fought Deontay Wilder, a man who had been knocking out heavyweights for over a decade, Parker's jab was the story of the fight. He threw it constantly, used it to keep Wilder at the end of his reach where that terrifying right hand couldn't land clean, and basically put on a boxing clinic that had Wilder looking frustrated and old. That's not an accident. That's years of technical refinement, countless rounds of sparring, and the kind of ring IQ that only comes from fighting the absolute best in the world for over a decade. Parker's footwork is another element that separates him from the plodding, flat-footed heavyweights who lumber around the ring like drunk elephants. He uses lateral movement, constant angle changes, and intelligent pivots to avoid becoming a stationary target. Remember, this is a guy who went 12 rounds with Anthony Joshua in his prime and never got seriously hurt, despite Joshua having a significant reach advantage and nuclear power in both hands. Parker survived that fight largely because he understood how to move, how to make Joshua miss, and how to avoid standing in the pocket where Joshua could tee off. Now fast forward to his recent performances, and you're seeing a Parker who's not just surviving against power punchers, he's systematically breaking them down. Against Wilder, he wasn't running scared, he was boxing intelligently, landing combinations, and making one of the most dangerous punchers in heavyweight history look ordinary. That takes serious technical skill, the kind that doesn't show up on a knockout highlight reel, but absolutely matters when the lights are bright and the stakes are championship level. Parker's combination punching is criminally underrated, and this is where things get interesting for our Wardley discussion. Unlike some heavyweights who throw single power shots and then admire their work like they're Michelangelo painting the Sistine Chapel, Parker throws in bunches. Jab, jab, right hand, left hook. He's constantly working, constantly keeping his opponents thinking, constantly creating defensive problems. His punch output is consistently high. He averages around 45 punches per round, which might not sound impressive until you realize you're throwing 12-ounce gloves while weighing somewhere north of 240 pounds. That's exhausting, both physically and mentally, and the fact that Parker maintains that output deep into fights demonstrates his elite conditioning and technical efficiency. He's not winging haymakers and gassing out by round 5. He's boxing, controlling pace, and using his energy intelligently. Now here's where Parker's technical advantages get even more interesting when we think about the Wardley matchup. Parker has faced and defeated multiple styles throughout his career, from the pure boxer in Hughie Fury to the aggressive brawler in Derek Chisora, who he beat twice, to the devastating puncher in Wilder. Each time he's adjusted his approach, shown tactical flexibility, and found ways to win. That versatility, that ability to adapt mid-fight and implement game plans against different styles is the hallmark of a genuinely elite technician. When you've been in there with the level of competition Parker has faced, you develop pattern recognition, you understand timing at an instinctive level, and you can read subtle cues that less experienced fighters miss completely. But, and this is a massive but that weighs heavier than a Bulgarian squat, Parker isn't some untouchable defensive wizard. He's been knocked out brutally by Joe Joyce in 2022, a fight that still haunts him like a bad dream about showing up to school in your underwear. Joyce, who's slower than continental drift and has the footwork of a shopping cart with a broken wheel, managed to break Parker down through sheer relentless pressure and volume punching. Joyce didn't outbox Parker in the traditional sense. He simply walked through everything, absorbed Parker's best shots, and kept coming forward like the Terminator until Parker's will broke. That loss revealed something crucial about Parker's technical approach. When he's forced to fight going backwards for extended periods, when he can't establish his jab and create space, when an opponent is willing to eat leather to land their own shots, Parker can be made uncomfortable. Joyce exploited that. Dillian Whyte found success using similar tactics, and guess who loves to walk forward throwing bombs? That's right, our friend Fabio Wardley. So now let's talk about Wardley, because this is where the narrative gets really spicy, like accidentally bit into a ghost pepper spicy. Fabio Wardley, the man who started his combat sports journey in white-collar boxing, which, for the uninitiated, is basically what happens when accountants and real estate agents decide they want to experience brain trauma on weekends. Wardley came from that background, turned professional relatively late, and has been fast-tracked through the heavyweight ranks faster than a Tesla in ludicrous mode. 19 wins, 1 draw, 18 knockouts. Those numbers are absolutely absurd. A knockout rate of 95% that makes Deontay Wilder look like a point fighter. When Wardley hits people, they don't just go down. They go down hard. They go down spectacularly. They go down in ways that make you immediately check to make sure they're still breathing. His most recent performance against Justis Huni perfectly encapsulates both the brilliance and the question marks surrounding Wardley's technical abilities. Huni, a slick Australian boxer with amateur pedigree and legitimate skills, was absolutely schooling Wardley for 9 rounds. The scorecards weren't close. Huni was outboxing him, making him miss, landing clean counters, and generally making Wardley look like a guy who was in way over his head. Then, in round 10, Wardley uncorked a right hand from the heavens, a punch so perfectly placed and devastatingly powerful that Huni face-planted on the canvas like someone had turned off his electricity. 1 punch, fight over, celebration time. But here's the uncomfortable truth that everyone seems to be ignoring while they marvel at the knockout. Wardley was losing badly when he landed that shot. He was getting comprehensively outboxed by a fighter who, while talented, isn't exactly considered an elite heavyweight threat. The same pattern emerged in Wardley's first fight with Frazer Clarke, where they fought to a controversial draw. Clarke, a British Olympic bronze medalist with solid fundamentals, gave Wardley absolute fits for 12 rounds. Wardley couldn't solve the puzzle, couldn't consistently land his power shots, and generally looked like a guy who was struggling against a decent boxer. The rematch was different. Wardley came out like a man possessed and demolished Clarke in the first round with a punch that literally left a visible dent in Clarke's head. Again, devastating power, but the question lingers like garlic breath after Italian food. What happens when that power doesn't land? What happens when Wardley faces a fighter who can box for 12 rounds, who won't stand in front of him, who has the footwork and ring IQ to avoid the big shot? Let's break down Wardley's actual technical boxing skills, because this is where things get really interesting. Wardley's footwork is, to put it charitably, a work in progress. He's not light on his feet, he doesn't pivot smoothly, and his ability to cut off the ring against a mobile opponent is questionable at best. When fighters move laterally against him, he tends to square up, walk forward in straight lines, and hope his pressure and power compensate for his lack of sophisticated ring generalship. That works great against limited opposition, against guys who are willing to stand and trade, against fighters who don't have the skill or confidence to box off the back foot for extended periods. But Joseph Parker has been boxing off the back foot his entire career. Parker has made a living out of frustrating pressure fighters by using angles, footwork, and intelligent distance management. Wardley's jab, while improving, is primarily a rangefinder rather than a true offensive weapon. He doesn't use it to control distance the way Parker does. He doesn't snap it out 30 times around to establish rhythm and break down his opponent's defense. Instead, Wardley's jab is more of a setup for his power shots, a way to get his opponent thinking about one thing so he can unload with the other. That's not necessarily bad boxing, but it's limited boxing. It's one-dimensional boxing, and against a fighter as experienced and technically sound as Parker, one-dimensional approaches tend to get exposed like a bad toupee in a windstorm. Wardley's defense is the elephant in the room that nobody wants to acknowledge because it's easier to focus on his highlight reel knockouts. His head movement is minimal, he doesn't slip and counter effectively, and he often relies on his physical toughness to absorb shots rather than avoiding them entirely. Again, this works when you're fighting guys who don't punch with authority, or who don't have the technical skill to exploit defensive holes. But Parker can punch. Parker has legitimate power, especially now that he's carrying more weight and sitting down on his shots. Parker also has the technical ability to find those defensive gaps, to land clean punches, and to make opponents pay for their defensive lapses. Here's where Wardley does have legitimate technical tools that could cause Parker problems, and I'd be lying if I said this wasn't a genuine threat. Wardley has developed a counter right hand that's absolutely lethal. Teddy Atlas, the legendary trainer who's forgotten more about boxing than most of us will ever know, broke down Wardley's technical approach and identified this as his primary weapon. Wardley sets a trap. He takes a small step back. He baits his opponent into reaching slightly, and then he counters with that massive right hand. It's a simple technique, but it's devastatingly effective when it lands. Clark got caught with it, Hooney got destroyed by it, and numerous other opponents have been on the receiving end of this particular punch. The question is, can Wardley get Parker to commit to punches in a way that opens him up to that counter? Parker is not a reckless puncher. He doesn't wildly overextend, and his defensive responsibility is generally pretty solid. However, and this is crucial, Parker does have moments where he commits to combinations, where he tries to impose his will and break opponents down, and those moments could theoretically create the opening Wardley needs. If Parker gets overconfident, if he thinks he can walk down Wardley and outwork him without consequence, if he makes the mistake of standing in range too long, that right hand is always there, always waiting, always ready to change the entire complexion of the fight in a split second. Wardley's body punching is another technical element that could play a role in this fight. He's shown a willingness to attack the body, to slow down his opponents, to drain their gas tank with heavy shots to the ribs and solar plexus. Against Parker, who's never had the most granite-like body defense, this could be a viable strategy. Landing body shots early could slow Parker's foot speed, make his movements less crisp, and potentially create opportunities for headshots later in the fight. It's a classic boxer versus puncher tactic, and while it requires Wardley to get inside Parker's jab range, which is no easy task, it's not impossible. But let's be brutally honest about the technical reality of this matchup, because that's what we do here at Heavy Jabs. We don't sell you fairy tales and promotional narratives. Can Fabio Wardley outbox Joseph Parker in a pure technical exchange over 12 rounds? The honest answer is no, probably not, almost certainly not. Wardley's technical skills, while improving, are still several levels below Parker's refined boxing ability. Parker has the better jab, the superior footwork, the more diverse combination punching, the greater ring IQ, and significantly more experience against elite competition. If this fight becomes a boxing match, if it's contested at range with both men using jabs and movement, Parker wins that fight 99 times out of 100. However, and this is the critical point that makes this fight so compelling despite the technical mismatch, heavyweight boxing isn't just about technical skill. It's about power, it's about heart, it's about who can impose their will, and it's about the reality that one punch can change everything. Wardley doesn't need to outbox Parker for 12 rounds. He needs to land one right hand, one perfect counter, one moment of sublime timing that catches Parker clean. That's the great equalizer in the heavyweight division. That's why we watch. That's why this fight is genuinely dangerous for Parker despite his obvious technical advantages. The betting odds reflect this reality perfectly. Parker is a massive favorite, somewhere around -500, depending on the bookmaker, which translates to roughly an 80% implied probability of victory. Wardley is sitting around +350 to +400, the clear underdog, but with odds that suggest he's got a legitimate puncher's chance. Those odds make sense when you understand the stylistic dynamics at play. Parker should win this fight based on skill, experience, and technical ability. But the heavyweight division has a long history of should doesn't always translate to does, especially when one fighter has the kind of power that can end matters in an instant. The strategic approach for both fighters is fairly obvious, but worth articulating. Parker needs to use his jab constantly, maintain distance, move laterally after every exchange, and force Wardley to chase him around the ring for 12 rounds. Parker needs to make this a boxing match, not a brawl. He needs to win ugly if necessary, banking rounds through superior activity and ring generalship rather than trying to match power with Wardley. Parker has done this before against Wilder. He used intelligent boxing to neutralize a devastating puncher, and he needs to implement a similar game plan here. The danger for Parker comes if he gets drawn into a firefight. If his ego tells him he needs to prove he can stand and trade with Wardley, if he starts hunting for his own knockout and abandons the tactical discipline that's made him successful. Wardley's path to victory is much simpler, but also much more difficult to execute. He needs to cut off the ring effectively. He needs to get inside Parker's jab range without eating too much leather. He needs to set up his right hand through feints and subtle movements, and he needs Parker to make a mistake. Wardley cannot afford to just walk forward mindlessly, absorbing jabs. That's a recipe for getting outpointed and possibly getting stopped late. He needs to be intelligent in his pressure. He needs to mix in body shots to slow Parker down, and he needs to create opportunities rather than just hoping they appear. Wardley also needs to be prepared for the long haul. This might not be a fight where he gets the early knockout. He might need to box smartly for 6 or 7 rounds before his opportunity presents itself. The historical precedent is worth examining because boxing loves to repeat itself like a broken record at a retirement home. Parker has lost to pressure fighters before. Joyce walked him down. White had success being aggressive. Even Anthony Joshua, who primarily boxed him, had his best moments when he was pressing forward. Wardley represents that same threat, a physically strong fighter who isn't afraid to take shots to land shots, who has genuine one-punch knockout power, and who has nothing to lose in this fight. Parker is the established name, fighting for his mandatory position and a shot at Usyk. Wardley is the hungry challenger trying to crash the elite party. That dynamic often produces upsets, the pressure of expectation weighing on favorites, while underdogs fight free and loose. But, and I cannot stress this enough, Wardley is not Joe Joyce. Joyce is a genuinely skilled boxer with excellent fundamentals, who happen to also be incredibly durable and have underrated power. Joyce systematically broke Parker down through superior boxing, not just through toughness and pressure. Wardley, for all his improvements, is not on Joyce's technical level. He's a much more limited boxer who happens to have spectacular power. That difference matters enormously over 12 rounds. The physical matchup also favors Parker in several key areas. Parker is the slightly smaller man, but he's thick, strong, and has proven he can handle heavyweight power. Wardley is tall and rangy, but he's not some overwhelming physical specimen like a young Lennox Lewis or Vladimir Klitschko. The size differential isn't significant enough to be a major factor. Parker's hand speed is noticeably faster than Wardley's, which allows him to beat Wardley to the punch in exchanges, land multiple shots before Wardley can respond, and generally control the tempo of offensive exchanges. The experience gap is absolutely massive and cannot be overstated. Parker has 40 professional fights, including world title fights, unification attempts, and battles with multiple elite heavyweights. He's been in hostile territories. He's fought in front of massive crowds. He's experienced every type of adversity a boxer can face. Wardley has 20 professional fights, most against domestic-level opposition. The mental aspect of this fight is fascinating when you dig beneath the surface. Parker is fighting for redemption, for validation, for the chance to become a two-time world champion and cement his legacy as one of the better heavyweights of his generation. He's been counted out multiple times. He's dealt with criticism. He's rebuilt himself from devastating losses, and he's emerged stronger and more focused. That mental toughness, that ability to persevere through adversity, gives Parker an edge in the championship rounds when fatigue sets in, and willpower becomes as important as technical skill. The judges and referee will play a role in how this fight unfolds. If the referee allows inside fighting, that potentially favors Wardley, who does some of his best work in the pocket. If the referee breaks them up constantly, similar to what happened in Parker's fight with Joshua, that favors Parker, who excels at range. The judges' scoring criteria matters too. If they reward activity and clean punching, Parker wins easily. If they give extra weight to effective aggression and harder single shots, Wardley could stay in rounds he's otherwise losing. These aren't insignificant details. They're often the difference between a clear decision and a controversial one. Let me address the elephant in the room that every serious boxing fan is thinking, but not everyone is willing to say out loud. Is this fight an unnecessary risk for Parker? Absolutely. 100% yes. Parker is the mandatory challenger. He's first in line for Usyk. He could have waited for his shot rather than taking a dangerous fight against a huge puncher. But Parker chose to stay active, chose to take this fight, and you have to respect that even if you question the strategic wisdom. Too many fighters in this era sit idle, wait for perfect opportunities, avoid dangerous opposition until there's absolutely no choice. Parker is doing the opposite. He's taking risks, he's proving himself against live opponents, and he's making the heavyweight division more interesting in the process. For Wardley, this is the opportunity of a lifetime, the chance to leapfrog years of gradual progression and land directly in a world title fight. If he wins, he's instantly a star, instantly a legitimate contender, instantly in conversations he had no business being in just a year ago. If he loses, provided he's competitive, he's still a player in the division, still a name people want to see, still a fighter with future opportunities. The risk-reward calculation for Wardley is entirely in his favor. The prediction game is always dangerous in heavyweight boxing. Because, as we've established approximately 17 times already, anything can happen when men this size throw punches with bad intentions. However, prediction is what people want. So here's my honest assessment based on technical analysis rather than hope or bias. Joseph Parker should win this fight, probably by decision, possibly by late stoppage if Wardley's limited technical skills lead to accumulating damage. Parker will likely establish his jab early, use movement to frustrate Wardley's pressure, and bank rounds through superior activity and cleaner punching. Wardley will have moments. He'll land some heavy shots, he'll make it uncomfortable, but ultimately the skill gap will be too significant over 12 rounds. But, and this is crucial, I would not be remotely shocked if Wardley scores the knockout. The power is real, the right hand is a genuine weapon, and Parker has shown vulnerability to pressure fighters before. If Wardley catches Parker clean, if that counter right hand lands at the perfect moment, if Parker makes a mental error or gets overconfident, we could absolutely see an upset that rocks the heavyweight division. That's the beauty and terror of this weight class. That's why we watch. That's why this fight matters despite the obvious technical advantages Parker possesses. The aftermath of this fight will shape the heavyweight division's immediate future. The winner gets Usyk, assuming the Ukrainian's injury heals and he's ready to defend. And that's a massive opportunity for either man. Parker versus Usyk would be a technical chess match between two of the sport's most skilled heavyweights, a fight where Parker's improvements and Usyk's mastery collide. Wardley versus Usyk would be a fascinating power versus skill matchup where Usyk would be heavily favored, but Wardley's power would make it perpetually dangerous. The loser likely has to rebuild, take another fight or two, and hope for another opportunity that might never come. So as we approach Fight Night, as the O2 Arena fills with British fans, hoping to see their countrymen shock the world, as Parker and his team implement their game plan, as Wardley looks for that one perfect punch, we're reminded why heavyweight boxing remains the most compelling division in the sport. The stakes are enormous, the potential for drama is unlimited, and the outcome, while predictable on paper, is never certain until someone's hand is raised. Can Fabio Wardley outbox Joseph Parker? No, he almost certainly cannot. Can Fabio Wardley knock out Joseph Parker? Absolutely yes. And that possibility, that threat, that puncher's chance, it makes this fight essential viewing.